Disaster for Maduro. Venezuela challenges the U.S. Navy, and what happens next is devastating. The Venezuelan dictator just made the biggest mistake of his political career. Venezuelan fighter jets flew just a few meters above a U.S. destroyer in international waters. The Pentagon called it highly provocative, while Maduro keeps poking the American government. The truth is, what used to be just political talk has now turned into real military action. Stick with me, because I'm going to show you how this move might have sealed the fate of the Venezuelan regime. You're about to find out, in detail, why challenging the U.S. Navy was the worst mistake Maduro could have made. On Tuesday, at 2:30 p.m. local time, two Venezuelan Sukhoi Su-30 military aircraft flew dangerously close to the American destroyer USS Jason Dunham in international Caribbean waters. The distance was so short that U.S. radars classified it as a hostile interception, a technical military term that's not thrown around lightly. But here's the detail nobody's talking about. This incident happened just 3 days after the United States carried out an airstrike against a vessel in the southern Caribbean, allegedly run by the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, killing 11 suspects. That timeline isn't a coincidence. It's a calculated escalation from both sides. On top of that, Maduro didn't just order the maneuver. He later defended it publicly, calling on the U.S. to come and try any action against Venezuela. That combo of military action followed by public provocation is exactly the type of sequence that turns diplomatic tension into an international crisis. To really get how serious this is, let's look at the exact numbers of what's in the water right now. The United States has strategically positioned 8 military vessels near Venezuela: 3 Aegis-class destroyers, USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson, the guided missile cruiser USS Lake Erie, a fast-attack nuclear submarine USS Newport News, 2 amphibious assault ships, and a littoral combat ship. This is the biggest concentration of American naval power in the Caribbean since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The official justification? Fighting drug trafficking. The political reality? A show of force aimed directly at Maduro's regime. Now, let's break down the technical details that really matter. The USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, was photographed crossing the Panama Canal last Friday. That image went viral online and proved the U.S. isn't bluffing. Each Aegis destroyer carries around 90 Tomahawk missiles and SM-3 anti-missile defense systems. The combined firepower of this fleet is greater than the entire military capacity of many European countries. But here's the kicker. Each ship also carries U.S. Coast Guard detachments and federal agents specialized in maritime interdiction. According to the Atlantic Council, 3 Aegis-guided destroyers and several other U.S. warships are moving into waters near Venezuela. Pentagon sources confirmed to Reuters that this operation, internally called Enhanced Counter-Narcotics Operations, has a 6-month budget. So this isn't some temporary show of force, it's a mid-term military presence, strategically placed. And the choice of ships reveals the real nature of the operation. Aegis systems are designed to detect and neutralize ballistic threats hundreds of kilometers away, way overkill for chasing drug boats, but essential for monitoring missile launches from a hostile country. On the Venezuelan side, Maduro didn't just talk, he actually mobilized his naval forces in a way few expected. Venezuela deployed warships and drones to the Gulf of Venezuela in response to U.S. naval moves near its coast, raising tensions over vital oil export routes. Now, let's get into the real numbers of Venezuela's military capacity that no one's talking about. The Venezuelan Navy has about 30,000 personnel, including 12,000 Marines and 600 naval aviation members. While that's way smaller than the U.S. presence, Venezuela does have some tactical advantages. For air defense, Venezuela operates long-range S-300VM anti-2500 surface-to-air missile systems, delivered around 2013 and considered some of the most advanced strategic assets in the region. At sea, Venezuela is believed to have Chinese-made C-802A anti-ship cruise missiles, capable of hitting naval targets up to 120 kilometers away, enough to threaten any ship approaching its coast. The Air Force flies Sukhoi Su-30 fighters, while the Army is equipped with Russian-made tanks and armored vehicles. More importantly, Venezuela has over 100,000 active duty personnel in its army, Air Force, and Navy, plus access to massive paramilitary reserves and pro-government militias. And here's the most shocking figure. Maduro activated his national emergency protocol with numbers that stunned international analysts. 15,000 soldiers were sent to the Colombian border. The National Guard ramped up coastal patrols, and the government launched a massive campaign to recruit 100,000 new civilian militiamen in just 2 weeks, numbers confirmed by Venezuela's own defense ministry. And this is where Maduro made the mistake that might have sealed his political fate. Instead of taking a quiet defensive stance, he went for maximum provocation. First, he called a press conference where he said Venezuela was ready to declare itself a republic in arms if attacked. Maduro is ready to declare a republic in arms if U.S. forces attack Venezuela, according to his own words. But the words were just the warm-up. The real move came when he personally authorized the Sukhoi fighter flyover above the U.S. destroyer. Venezuelan military sources, speaking anonymously, confirmed the order came straight from the presidential palace. Then Maduro doubled down at a military event in Caracas. He called the U.S. presence a hostile siege violating the UN Charter and publicly challenged, if they want to come, let them come. We're ready. That combo of military action plus public provocation is exactly the type of escalation international relations experts call a dangerous game. But there's a deeper strategic angle Maduro might be playing at. Venezuela controls the strait that connects the Caribbean to the Atlantic, through which 40% of the oil supplying the U.S. East Coast flows. Any disruption of that route could cause an American energy crisis in just days. But everything escalated on Thursday at 2:30 p.m., the moment when diplomatic tension turned into a real military crisis. 2 Venezuelan Su-30 MKV fighter jets took off from Maracay Air Base with a specific mission: intercept and fly over the USS Jason Dunham in international waters. 2 Venezuelan military planes flew close to a U.S. Navy ship in international waters on Thursday, in a move the U.S. Department of Defense called highly provocative. What happened in the next 7 minutes was recorded by multiple radar systems and documented in a classified Pentagon report, parts of which were leaked to the U.S. press. The Venezuelan jets approached the U.S. destroyer at a closing speed classified by defense systems as an attack profile. The closest distance recorded was just 200 meters in military terms. That's a hostile interception. The USS Jason Dunham activated its close-in defense systems and sent multiple radio warnings in both Spanish and English, ordering the aircraft to back off immediately. The Venezuelan pilots not only ignored the warnings, they made a second, even closer pass before returning to base. The whole incident was tracked by U.S. satellites and Allied warships in the area. The Pentagon officially called the event a highly provocative maneuver that could have resulted in a lethal defensive response, which, translated, means they were seconds away from being shot down. Now, let's break down the technical analysis nobody's digging into. On paper, Venezuela versus the United States in a naval fight would be a quick, one-sided massacre. The U.S. fleet in the Caribbean has more firepower than the entire Venezuelan Navy combined. Each Aegis destroyer has Spy 1D radars that can track over 100 targets at a 400 kilometers range simultaneously. Tomahawk missiles can hit targets 600 kilometers away with surgical accuracy. Compare that with the Venezuelan fleet, about 60 vessels, most from the 1970s and 1980s, with major maintenance problems due to the tech embargo. Venezuela's military power index, PWR index, is 0.8882, where 0.0000 is perfect. To put that in perspective, the United States has an index of 0.0699, a massive gap, the biggest naval power imbalance ever seen in a potential Western Hemisphere conflict. But Venezuela doesn't need to win a direct confrontation to give the U.S. serious headaches. Their strategy relies on asymmetric tactics, fast boats, naval mines, attack drones, Russian-caliber coastal cruise missiles, and above all, the ability to choke the strait connecting the Caribbean to the Atlantic. On September 3, 2025, Venezuelan oil exports hit 900,000 barrels per day, the highest since November 2024, a 9-month peak, meaning Venezuela is exporting more oil now than at any recent point, right as the U.S. is trying to tighten economic pressure. Venezuela also has a big psychological edge. Any fight would literally happen in its home waters, with full logistical support from the coastal population and intimate knowledge of every current, reef, and weather pattern in the region. What's happening in the Caribbean goes way beyond the U.S. versus Venezuela. It's a geopolitical chessboard where every move has continental consequences. Russia and China are watching every detail of this crisis, because any precedent of U.S. military intervention in Latin America directly affects their own strategic interests in the region. Putin has already signaled diplomatic and technical support for Maduro, language that historically comes right before sending military advisors and advanced defense systems. European intel sources confirm unusual Russian cargo ship movements toward Venezuelan ports, possibly carrying military gear that could drastically change the balance of power in the region. China, meanwhile, has over $20 billion invested in Venezuelan infrastructure and can't afford those assets being compromised by political instability. More importantly, China is currently the biggest buyer of Venezuelan oil, taking in 60% of the country's exports, an economic dependence that makes Beijing a key player in this crisis. On the U.S. side, Trump has turned this crisis into a credibility test for his second presidency. Backing down now, after sending 8 warships, would be seen globally as weakness, politically unacceptable for an administration that promised America first with an iron fist. Latin American countries are split in ways that reveal surprising geopolitical alignments. Brazil and Mexico called for moderation and dialogue, while Colombia secretly fed the U.S. intel on Venezuelan troop movements at the border. Chile and Argentina stay publicly neutral, but their militaries are quietly consulting Pentagon advisors. The economic dimension of this crisis is way more explosive than most people realize. A potential U.S. blockade on Venezuelan oil could lead to petroleum piracy in the Caribbean, turning vital trade routes into high-risk zones. Any disruption of Caribbean shipping lanes could spike global oil prices by 30 to 40% in just days, a nightmare scenario for Wall Street and European markets. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves, 304 billion barrels, more than Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. But there's another economic angle most aren't looking at. The crisis is already causing capital flight from the region. The Venezuelan bolivar dropped 12% in 5 days, the sharpest fall since the 2019 crisis. Even worse, Chinese investments in Latin America have been put under review, diplomatic speak for freezing billions in infrastructure projects. Economically, Venezuela lost in 1 week the equivalent of 6 months of oil revenue just from market instability. Neighboring countries are already feeling the pinch. Caribbean tourism bookings dropped 15% for the next 3 months due to maritime security fears. So why do we call this a disaster for Maduro, even though he hasn't been militarily defeated? The answer lies in the ruthless political math that rules authoritarian regimes, and that few analysts are explaining right. Maduro made the classic mistake of leaders in crisis, confusing bravado with strategy. By authorizing the fighter flyover on the U.S. destroyer, he forced the U.S. to choose between backing down publicly, politically impossible for Trump, or escalating the crisis to the point where only military solutions remain. The immediate results were disastrous on multiple fronts. Colombia informally shut its border to bilateral trade, costing Venezuela $200 million in weekly revenue. Brazil suspended $5 billion worth of energy investment talks, and China put $12 billion in new infrastructure projects under review, diplomatic language for an indefinite freeze. But the political disaster runs even deeper. Maduro turned a foreign policy issue into a survival test for his regime. If he backs down now, his own military, especially the generals profiting from drug trafficking, will see him as weak. If he escalates, he hands the U.S. legal and political justification for a response that could completely destroy his military capacity. It's the perfect definition of a strategic trap. Every next move weakens Maduro politically, no matter what he does. In game theory, this situation is called zugzwang, where any move only makes things worse. To fully get this crisis, we need to analyze the Trump factor and how his second presidency changed the geopolitical rules in ways few grasp. Unlike his first term, Trump now has a national security team filled with military guys who see Venezuela as the perfect chance to show off U.S. power in the region. The current defense secretary, unlike his predecessors, has a history of defending preventive military solutions, a doctrine that favors action before adversaries turn into existential threats. From that strategic angle, Venezuela is the perfect test case, a militarily weaker, geographically close, and globally isolated target. Trump also has crucial domestic electoral motives. His political base wants concrete action against what they call the socialist threat in America's backyard. Backing down in front of Maduro would look like weakness to key voters in Florida and Texas, states with large Latin American communities who fled authoritarian regimes and could swing upcoming congressional elections. The new U.S. doctrine also carries a key economic piece. American control over Venezuelan oil production could completely reshape global energy markets and reduce U.S. dependence on Middle Eastern oil, a strategic prize that would justify the political and military costs of intervention. From a military perspective, this operation also serves as a lab to test new tech and tactics that will eventually be used against bigger adversaries like China or Russia. Every intercepted missile, every drone shot down, every hacked comm system in Venezuela gives the Pentagon valuable data for future large-scale confrontations. International reactions to this crisis revealed geopolitical alignments that surprised even seasoned analysts, showing how the multipolar world is reshaping itself. France and the UK, traditionally unconditional U.S. allies, issued statements calling for restraint on both sides, diplomatic code for indirect criticism of U.S. escalation. Germany was even blunter. The chancellor said military solutions in Latin America don't serve global stability, a stance that created tension in transatlantic relations and exposed cracks in the Western alliance. The EU is split between backing its U.S. ally and protecting over 40 billion euros in regional investments. Russia reacted in a calculated but worrisome way. Putin announced routine naval exercises in the South Atlantic, but U.S. satellites spotted unscheduled movements of Russian nuclear submarines toward the Caribbean, an escalation no one expected in the original crisis, adding a nuclear dimension to the standoff. China took the smartest and most dangerous approach, publicly calling for peace and dialogue at the UN, but secretly negotiating with Maduro to urgently deliver HQ-9 air defense systems and DF-15 short-range ballistic missiles, weapons that could turn a quick U.S. victory into a prolonged, costly conflict. The biggest surprise came from Arab oil producers. Saudi Arabia and the UAE quietly offered to increase oil production by 2 million barrels per day if the Venezuelan crisis disrupts global supply, a move that shows not only they expect the conflict to intensify, but also see an economic chance to wipe out a competitor. After analyzing all the facts, leaked military docks, naval movements, and diplomatic reactions, the conclusion is inevitable. Maduro turned an American show of force into a deadly strategic trap for his own regime. By choosing direct military provocation over smart political resistance, he gave the U.S. exactly the justification it needed for a disproportionate response. This is no longer about drug trafficking or democracy in Venezuela. It's a test of strength between superpowers using the Caribbean as an arena. With Maduro as the lead in a drama he has no capacity to control, Maduro has become a pawn in a much bigger game than his political or military skills can handle. The disaster for Maduro isn't the military outcome, which is mathematically predictable, but the political inevitability he created for himself. Every next decision weakens him domestically. Every next provocation gives the U.S. more international legitimacy. And every passing day exponentially reduces his options for an honorable exit. The question isn't if something will happen anymore, but when and how hard. The next 72 hours will be decisive. Either international diplomacy finds a way to create a face-saving mutual retreat, or we'll be witnessing the opening moves of a confrontation that could permanently redefine the balance of power in the entire Western Hemisphere. And here's the final irony that sums up this whole geopolitical drama. Maduro wanted to show national and international strength, and ended up proving the exact opposite, that his regime only survives as long as it doesn't truly challenge U.S. military and economic power. Maduro bet it all on a military bluff that could cost him not just his political power, but potentially his freedom and the stability of the entire region. The move that was supposed to show Bolivarian courage turned into a display of strategic amateurism on an international scale. We call it a disaster because for an authoritarian leader surrounded by enemies, losing military and political credibility means literally losing everything. Now, I want your opinion. Was Maduro brave for directly challenging U.S. naval power? Or was he reckless for putting his country at risk of military intervention? Was the escalation with fighter jets a smart tactical move? Or could this whole crisis have been avoided with better diplomacy? Drop your thoughts. Share this content. Don't forget to subscribe, because in the coming weeks we'll be tracking every move in this military chess match that could literally change Latin American history forever.